There are things one cannot explain with ordinary words. There are experiences that change you so deeply inside that when you try to recount them, human language feels inadequate, as if words were tiny vessels trying to hold an ocean. What I went through is one of those things, and I know perfectly well that the trauma affected my brain, or that I made it all up just to get attention or go viral on social media, but I have an obligation I feel in my bones, in the very center of my chest, to tell what happened to me, because what I saw on the other side wasn't just for me, it was a message, and that message carries urgency, and it has to reach the right ears before it's too late. My name is Valeria Esperanza Reyes Dominguez. I'm 38 years old from the state of Mexico. I'm a dishwasher. It's as simple and clear as that. I've spent 9 years working in the same kitchen at the restaurant. It's a place where folks who don't have the time or money for fancy places come to eat. I wash the plates, the pots, the pans, the glasses, and the cutlery. 8 hours standing at the sink, my hands submerged in hot water that sometimes truly burns, using industrial soap that reeks of harsh chemicals and, over time, leaves your hands wrinkled, cracked, and parched. They are hard-working hands, my mother's hands, and my grandmother's before hers, and those very hands were the ones that led me, without my realizing it, to the most important encounter of my life. Before I tell you what happened in the kitchen that day, I need you to get to know me a little, because everything I saw on the other side only makes sense if you understand who I am and where I come from. My father, Don Aurelio Reyes Gutierrez, left when I was 7 years old. He didn't die, he just left. He left for another woman, another family, and for many years that was an open wound I carried, not knowing how to heal it. My mother was left on her own with 4 children and no steady job. She sold tamales on weekends and cleaned houses during the week. I saw how hard she worked, and from the time I was a child, I learned that work doesn't ask for permission to make you tired. You simply have to do it. By the time I was 14, I was already helping her with the houses she cleaned. At 16, I started working. When I arrived in Mexico City, I met Don Serafin Castellanos Vega, an older gentleman who managed the restaurant where I started working as a waitress. Don Serafin was a man of steadfast faith, a believer who made no fuss about his religion yet lived his life differently. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave. He was honest down to the last penny. He never raised his voice and never spoke ill of anyone. I used to watch him and think, that man has something I don't have, a peace, an inner stability that didn't depend on whether the day was going well or badly. One day, I asked him directly, "Tell me, Don Serafin, why are you always so calm?" And he looked at me with those brown eyes of his, filled with something I couldn't yet name, and said, "Valeria, I know the one who has everything under control, and that is enough for me." That answer stayed with me for weeks. I didn't understand it right away, but something began to stir inside me. Don Serafin invited me to a Bible study at his home. I went out of curiosity rather than faith, expecting something boring, little old ladies singing off-key hymns, but what I found was something different. It was a small group, about 12 people of various ages, gathering on Wednesdays to read the Bible together, ask questions, and share what they were going through. There was no judgment, no hierarchy, there was a genuine hunger to understand something greater than everyday life. I started going every week, began reading the Bible on my own, and little by little, in that slow, silent process no one sees, but where God works in secret, I began to understand what Don Serafin was talking about. I began to know Jesus. Not just know about him, but truly know him. I married Bernardo Salazar Moreno 11 years ago. Bernardo is an auto mechanic, a good man at heart, hard-working, a loving father who has never once disrespected us. But spiritually, Bernardo and I come from different worlds. He grew up in a family where religion was considered something only for women and the elderly. The men in his household didn't go to mass, they didn't talk about God, and if they ever did mention him, it was only to curse the divine name when something went wrong. Bernardo respects me and my faith, but he doesn't share it, and for years, that created a silent rift in our relationship. I would come home from Bible study with a fire inside me, eager to share what I had learned. Meanwhile, he would be sprawled on the couch with his phone in hand, watching YouTube videos, soccer commentary, memes, anything to fill the time, without requiring anything. I tried to talk to him about what I was feeling, about what God was doing in my life. But I could sense him drifting away without even listening, his eyes fixed on the screen. It wasn't malice, it was distance. It was that invisible wall built brick by brick. When two people share a roof but not a direction. We have two children, Daniela, who is 13, and little Matteo, who is 8. Daniela began to change over the last year. She used to be a girl who would come with me to Bible study without much prodding. She would sing the hymns, participate, and ask intelligent questions about the Bible stories. But something happened when she started middle school. New friendships, social media, a world flooding into her eyes through that tiny screen, a screen I sometimes think is a portal to another universe. She started telling me that church was for people with nothing better to do, that God was just an old wives' tale, and that her friends didn't believe in any of that yet were happy. Listening to her hurt me deeply, like a wound that wouldn't heal. Little Matteo still comes with me. He still prays before bed and asks me to tell him Bible stories. But I could already see the world closing in on him, see the same forces that were pulling Daniela toward the darkness beginning to lurk around him. In the months leading up to what happened, I also felt something I couldn't quite name, an unusual anguish, a heaviness that it would strike without warning, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes right in the middle of the workday while standing at the kitchen sink. It was as if the air itself had grown thicker, as if something massive were stirring in the spiritual realm, something I could sense but couldn't clearly see. I tried talking about it with my sister in the faith, Dona Rosario Figueroa Campos, an older woman who has walked with the Lord for many years and has been like a spiritual mother to me. She listened to me with her characteristic patience and said something I didn't fully grasp at the time. Valeria, when the Holy Spirit stirs your soul like this, it isn't to frighten you, but to prepare you. What lies ahead requires you to stand firm. I nodded, though I didn't understand, but talk to God as well, because what is troubling you isn't merely physical. On that day, they had changed brands. The supplier had brought a new, different product, and the manager had mixed it into the sink without telling anyone it was a different formula. For the first 10 minutes, I didn't notice anything different. I kept washing dishes, stacking them in the rack, moving on to the next one, and the next, just like always. But then it started. At first, it was an itch in my throat, something I thought was just steam from the hot water, then a burning sensation in my nose, and then I started to cough, not a normal cough, but one that came from deep inside, from the bottom of my chest, as if something were squeezing my lungs from within. I tried to step away from the sink, but my legs weren't responding properly anymore. Chef Rodrigo saw me and shouted, "Hey, Valeria, what's wrong? Are you about to faint or what?" The last thing I remember is trying to tell him I couldn't breathe, that something was happening to my throat, and then the kitchen floor rushed up to meet me. My knees hit first, then the rest of me, and the sounds of the kitchen, the shouting, the sizzling oil, all began to fade away, like turning down the radio volume very slowly, until there was nothing but total silence, a silence not of this world. Later, I found out what happened. The allergic reaction to the new chemical compound in the industrial soap was violent and immediate. My throat closed up in seconds, my heart stopped. Chef Rodrigo called emergency services, screaming like a madman. My co-workers didn't know what to do. The ambulance arrived in 7 minutes, but by then, I was no longer in that kitchen. I was no longer anywhere in this world. The first thing I remember on the other side is that there was no pain, and that was what made me realize something very different was happening, because the final seconds before I blacked out had been nothing but pain, panic, and desperation. But suddenly, none of that was there. There was a total absence of all the heavy burdens one carries in the body. All of it was simply gone, and I was present, more conscious than I had ever been in my life, with a mental clarity so pure and sharp that it was as if, for 38 years, I had been viewing the world through fogged-up glass, and suddenly someone had wiped it clean. revealing the world in its true, perfect definition, without distortion. I realized I was looking down at the kitchen from above. I could see my own body on the floor with my co-workers around it. I should have been afraid that it was my body lying there, that it was my life coming to an end. But what I felt was something more like a profound calm, like stepping into a hot bath after a very long day and feeling the water wash away all the tension in your body, a calm that wasn't indifference, but peace, a peace that surpasses all understanding. And I understood it in that moment, not as a memorized verse, but as a lived reality. And then I saw him. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't like in the movies, where a distant light appears and you walk slowly toward it. It was immediate. I turned, if that makes sense when one has no body. I directed my attention elsewhere, and he was there. And I know people will ask, how do you know it was Jesus? And the answer is the same one given by everyone who has gone through something like this. I knew, not because he wore a sign, not because someone introduced me to him. I knew in the same way one knows one is standing before the sun, even with eyes closed, because the heat and light tell you so without the need for words. I knew because something within me, in that self that exists beyond the physical body, recognized him instantly with a certainty that left no room for doubt. He wasn't smiling. That was the first thing that struck me. I had always imagined Jesus smiling, with that gentle, compassionate expression found in religious images, paintings, and the prayer cards sold in parishes. But the Jesus before me wasn't smiling. He was serious. He was focused with the kind of seriousness one sees in a person doing something that demands their full attention, something urgent, something that allows for no distraction. It wasn't a cold or distant seriousness, it was the seriousness of someone who loves you deeply and, for that very reason, is being direct with you, without embellishment, without sugarcoating things. It was the seriousness of a mother who sees her child walking into danger and shouts his name to make him stop. There is no cruelty in that, there is urgent love, and from him emanated that authority which cannot be faked, bought, or learned. This authority, stemming from the one who is truly the Creator, holding his creation in his hands, the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, as written in Revelation 1 verse 17, he extended his hand toward me. Without making any conscious decision, I found myself moving upward with him, not upward in the physical sense of climbing stairs, but upward in a way that has no equivalent in human language, as if my perspective were expanding exponentially, as if the lens through which one views reality suddenly opened from the nearest point to the farthest in a fraction of a second, and the earth appeared beneath us. I saw it in its entirety, not merely like the NASA photos, though it was indeed that same blue planet suspended in the darkness. I saw it with a dimension that photographs cannot capture, the presence of something alive, something breathing, something possessing history, weight, and meaning. What struck me in that moment was its beauty, the beauty God placed in that creation, and, simultaneously, the pain of seeing it covered by something that should not be there. There was a haze, not a meteorological mist, nor something clouds could explain. It was a haze of a different nature, dense and dark in some places, thinner in others, moving slowly over continents, cities, and fields, like a veil someone was deliberately spreading over all that exists. It was confusion, it was spiritual darkness, and as I watched, Jesus spoke, his voice. I must try to describe his voice, even though I know I will fail, for human words fall short. It wasn't a loud voice, not in terms of volume. He wasn't shouting, but it had a resonance, a depth, as if every word he spoke existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It was as if the words emerging from him weren't just heard but felt, as if every syllable landed at the very center of your being and rearranged it. And what he said with that seriousness I described earlier, straight to the point, looking directly at whatever it is one has instead of eyes when one is out of the body. He told me, "Valeria, I wash things too, watch how I wash," and in that instant, I understood that he was using the only language I had truly mastered, the language of my work, the language of hands in water, the language of dirt washing away and cleanliness remaining. And what followed was the greatest revelation of my life. Jesus explained to me, not through a long sermon, but through images and words that went straight to my understanding without needing to be decoded, that what is happening in the world right now is not what it seems from the inside. From the inside, from a limited human perspective, everything looks like chaos, division, conflict, families breaking apart, churches fracturing, friendships unraveling, relationships failing, people fighting over politics, ideas, and interpretations of the Bible, over things that didn't matter so much before. From the inside, it looks like everything is being destroyed, but he told me, what you call destruction, I call washing. He showed me how the process works, and I understood it because I had lived it in my own body through 9 years of work. When you wash a really dirty dish, it isn't enough to just run cold water over it and wipe it with a damp cloth. That only moves the surface dirt around, it shifts it without actually getting rid of it. To truly wash something, you have to use hot water. Hot water opens the pores, loosens the grease, and softens the caked-on grime. And strong soap, that industrial soap that sometimes burns your hands, that is what penetrates the dirt and breaks it down from within. And the friction, the scrubbing, the work of hands that do not relent, even when fingers are red and sore, that is what finishes the job. Heat, soap, and friction, that is what produces true cleansing. He told me, that is how I am washing humanity. The heat they feel is real, the friction they feel is real, the discomfort is part of the process. It is not a mistake, it is not that I have abandoned them, it is that I am scrubbing away the crust, and the crust is hard, Valeria, it is very hard, it has taken centuries to accumulate, it holds generations of sin deposited in layer upon layer until it becomes something almost impossible to separate from the surface. But I know how to wash, I am the one who washes, and what that revelation made me feel was not fear, but a kind of immense relief, like when you have spent a long time believing something terrible is happening for no reason, and suddenly someone with authority tells you there is a reason, that there is a plan, that what looks like disaster is actually a process, as the prophet Isaiah says in chapter 43, verse 2, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when through the rivers, they will not drown you. When you pass through the fire, you will not be burned, nor will the flame consume you. Fire and water are not the enemy, they are the method. But then Jesus showed me something that was much harder for me to process. He drew my attention to the cities beneath us, and from that panoramic view, we were drawing closer, not physically, but in terms of perception, until I could make out neighborhoods and streets, buildings, and I saw how the dark mist covering the world descended in a particular way upon the temples, upon the churches, upon the places where those who claim to follow God gather, and it took my breath away. If indeed one breathes when one has no body, why was the densest mist over the places of worship, and not over the bars, the markets, or the government offices? And Jesus said to me, because where there is more light, the darkness fights harder, and because within those places there is something I have long wanted to cleanse. He showed me what was inside those churches, and it was the most painful part of everything I saw, because I saw buildings filled with people singing praises, lifting their hands, shouting Amen and glory to God, tithing, serving in ministries, and knowing the Bible from beginning to end. And those people shone, but not all of them shone in the same way. Some had a light that came from within, a living light that pulsed like a heart, warm, constant, and real, while others had something that looked like light at first glance but was different upon closer inspection. It was colder, more static. It was like the light of a television screen compared to the light of a lit candle. Both provide illumination, but one has life and the other does not. Jesus said to me, those are the plastic crystals, and the moment he said it, I understood exactly what he was talking about, because in the restaurant kitchen, we also have plastic glasses, made of that clear plastic that mimics glass but isn't glass. We buy them because they are cheaper and don't break as easily, but when you wash them in very hot water, the plastic deforms, wrinkles, warps, and loses its shape. Real glass withstands hot water, real glass withstands harsh soap, real glass withstands friction because it was made to last, made with the right material, made to withstand temperature. Plastic does not. he showed me those plastic believers, people who had built an entire Christian identity around the appearance of faith, without the foundations of faith, people who knew the right vocabulary, the songs, and the code of conduct of the believing community, who could quote verses at the precise moment and appear, full of spiritual wisdom, yet in private, behind closed doors, when no one was watching. They had no real connection with him. They prayed with words, but their hearts were far away. They read the Bible, but they read it like a contract, looking for what suited them while ignoring what it demanded of them. They served in the church, but they served to be seen, for recognition, and for status within the community's social hierarchy. They did not serve out of love. He showed me what was happening to those people under the heat of the washing process. They were becoming distorted, entering into crisis, and either abandoning the faith or transforming it into something that no longer resembled biblical faith. They were fighting with leaders and with one another, falling into sins they had previously been able to control, because the hot water was revealing what lay beneath the polished surface. And Jesus said it in the most direct way I can repeat: plastic cannot enter the kingdom. It's not that I hate it, it's simply that it wasn't made from the substance of the kingdom, it was made from an imitation of the kingdom. And when an imitation passes through the fire of testing, it reveals what it truly is. Matthew 7 verse 21 puts it in words I had read many times but never understood quite like this. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you, depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. I always thought that verse spoke of other people, some extreme category of religious hypocrites who were neither me nor anyone I knew, but on the other side, I saw the reality of those words. I saw that the criterion wasn't how much you had done in God's name, it was whether he knew you, it was whether there was a real, living, daily, honest relationship between you and him. Then Jesus did something that changed me forever. He lowered his gaze as if looking at a specific place on earth and led me to see what he was seeing, and I saw a house, an ordinary house, the kind found in any working-class neighborhood in Mexico, with walls painted in colors that had once been bright but were now faded, with an iron gate at the entrance, and a television on that could be seen through the window. It was a house like mine. In many ways, it was my house. I saw a man sitting in an armchair. I could see inside him, not his body, but something deeper, as if perception on the other side allowed you to see a person's spiritual condition just as, on this side, you see the color of their clothes. And what I saw in that man was darkness, not an aggressive darkness, not the darkness of a horror movie, but a passive, gray darkness, like the gloom of a room where no light has entered for a long time. It was a darkness that had settled in little by little, silently, as the man spent hour after hour with his eyes glued to his phone screen, not necessarily videos with explicitly bad content. It could be soccer, jokes, videos about cars or mechanics, anything at all, but the constant was that the mental space God placed in every human being to be filled by him, that space was completely filled with digital noise, and where there is no light, darkness occupies the space, not because darkness holds power of its own, but because it is what remains when the light departs. And I saw a woman in that same house, in the next room, kneeling beside her bed with hands clasped and lips moving in silent prayer, and light radiated from her. It was a light that had nothing to do with her actions, her possessions, or any merit of her own. It was the light of someone who had chosen, day after day, amidst weariness, doubts, and unanswered questions, to keep seeking God, not perfectly, not without stumbling, but with honesty and an open heart, with that readiness spoken of in Jeremiah 29:13. You will seek me and find me, when you seek me with all your heart. And that seeking heart, though imperfect, though bearing fears, scars, and moments of weakness, that heart shone in the darkness of the house like a candle in a closed room. And Jesus said to me, that is where the separation lies, not in religion, not in the name of the church they attend, not in whether they are baptized in a certain way or pray using specific words. The separation lies in the direction of the heart, a heart turning toward me, even if with small, faltering steps. I know that heart. A heart that turns away from me, even while maintaining all the outward appearances of religion. That heart does not know me, and what is happening in the world right now is that this line is becoming increasingly visible. It is becoming impossible to ignore. Situations are arising that demand each person declare where they stand, not with words, but with decisions, not in public, but in secret, not before the pastor, but before me. The mist I saw descending upon the cities was not random, it was that pressure, that heat from the washing, reaching every corner so that what lies within each person's heart rises to the surface, because hot water does that, it draws up the dirt. What was hidden at the bottom of the vessel appears when the hot water touches it, and God is allowing a level of pressure in the world that is bringing to the surface what lay at the bottom of every heart. That is why there are divisions in families that once seemed united. That is why there is coldness between lifelong friends. That is why churches are fracturing, not because the enemy has won, but because the hot water of God's washing is bringing up what was underneath. What appeared to be unity was sometimes merely coexistence. What appeared to be love was sometimes merely habit. What appeared to be faith was sometimes merely tradition, and the washing is revealing it all. And then he showed me something that was much harder to describe, because there is no physical image that perfectly corresponds to it. He showed me what I call their drain of eternity, and I understand it in terms of my work, because in industrial kitchens we have a sink drain. That drain where dirty water flows away after washing. Everything that cannot remain goes down there, the residue, the waste, the peels, the food scraps left on the plates. The clean water stays, the dirty water drains away, and the dishes that withstood the process emerge clean, ready to serve again. Those that didn't, the ones that broke or became deformed, are no longer fit for the table. He showed me how, in the purification process currently underway, there are souls being discarded through that drain, not because God hates them, nor because he has stopped loving them, but because they themselves, in the freedom God granted them, have consistently chosen to distance themselves from him. They have chosen noise over the silence of prayer. They have chosen the comfort of sin over the discomfort of holiness. They have chosen the world's approval over God's approval, and those choices, made day after day for years, have become the permanent orientation of their hearts. Yet God, who respects the freedom he himself gave to humanity, forces no one to stay with him, as Revelation 3:20 says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him, and he with me." He knocks, but he does not break down the door. He waits for it to be opened from within, and the anguish of witnessing that, of seeing souls whom I could perceive had been loved by God since before the foundation of the world, souls who carried the potential for a beautiful relationship with him, passing through that drain because they had chosen not to open the door to him. That anguish was the hardest part of everything I experienced on the other side. It wasn't seeing the darkness, or the fog, or the divisions. It was understanding the weight of human freedom and the cost of repeatedly making the wrong choice. But Jesus didn't leave me alone in that anguish. He spoke to me about true worshippers, and here I want to be very precise, because this, too, was a revelation that moved me deeply, because when one thinks of true worshippers, the mind immediately goes to the most religious people one knows, to those who sing the most in church, alos que más ayunan, to those who serve most in the ministries. But what Jesus showed me regarding true worshippers does not necessarily match that image. He showed me a market woman, one of those who sell vegetables starting at 5 in the morning, who, on the bus ride home, tired and with swollen feet, whispered a prayer of thanksgiving unseen by anyone, not an elaborate prayer, not one filled with theological vocabulary, but simply, "Lord, thank you for another day, help my children," and that simple prayer, rising from a genuine heart in a moment of genuine weariness, shone brighter than many sermons I have heard in my life. He showed me a 22-year-old young man. The kind who doesn't look like a believer on the outside, who wears rapper-style clothes and listens to music his pastor wouldn't approve of, who harbors questions and doubts he's too embarrassed to voice in church, yet who speaks honestly to God alone in his room, saying, "I don't understand a lot of things, but you are real to me, and somehow that matters more than anything else." And that confused, contradictory young man shone with a genuine light, because what he possessed was real. He showed me a grandmother who cannot read, who has never been able to read the Bible on her own because no one taught her when she was a child, yet who carries it everywhere. When someone reads it to her, she listens with an attentiveness and a hunger that many university-trained theologians lack, that hunger, that thirst for God coming from someone who never had easy access to him, yet seeks him regardless. That thirst was exactly what Psalm 42:1 speaks of, "As the deer pants for the water brooks, so pants my soul for you, O God." True worshippers endure hot water, not because they are made of stone, not because they feel no pain, not because they don't weep, doubt, or grow weary, but because they do not let go, because amidst the discomfort of the process, in the boiling water of the cleansing, they remain clinging to him, and that is what he seeks, not perfection, not religious performance, but the hand that holds fast even while trembling, the heart that seeks him even while doubting, the soul that declares in its deepest darkness, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him," just as Job said in chapters 13 and 15. Then Jesus spoke to me of urgency, and here his voice changed slightly, not in volume, but in weight, as if what followed was the most important thing he had to tell me. He said, "The door is closing," and he said it with a clarity that left no room for interpretation or for nuances, not as a threat, but as a reality. Like when a doctor tells you that the time for treatment is reaching its limit and decisions must be made right now, with that same urgency, with that same blend of love and firmness found in someone telling you the truth for your own good, even if it isn't the truth you want to hear. He explained to me that there is a special grace, a window of mercy that he has extended over humanity so that people can respond to the call, and that this window is not infinite. Not because God grows tired of waiting or runs out of patience in the human sense, but because there is an order to creation, there is a clock that he himself designed, and when that clock reaches a certain point, what each person has chosen will be confirmed, not as a punishment, music, but as a consequence of their own choices, like sink water inevitably flowing down the drain when the washing is done. And he told me something, which I repeat exactly as I understood it. The unease many are feeling right now is not anxiety, not depression, not the stress of the modern world, though that stress exists, too. It is the Holy Spirit separating light from darkness within their own hearts, just as in the beginning, when God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and he separated it from the darkness. That very thing is happening now in the spiritual dimension, in dimensions of human existence that physical eyes cannot see, but the heart can feel if it is open, and that discomfort, that sense that something is wrong without being able to pinpoint exactly what, that urgency with no apparent source, that is the Holy Spirit at work. Do not quench it, do not medicate it, do not silence it with entertainment or noise, listen to it, obey it. And then came the moment of return. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't like waking from a pleasant dream, it was abrupt, almost violent, like someone yanking your arm hard because there is danger and no time for explanations. I felt Jesus looking at me with that seriousness I described earlier, and he said, "Go back, there are people who need to hear this, there are words you need to speak, there is a time for you that isn't over yet, go back." And before I could say anything, before I could process, respond, or even understand what was happening, it was as if I were being yanked back down at a speed